Let's go ahead with the housekeeping.
Thank you for participating in today's meeting. Please do not connect to Zoom or teleconference while in the room, and please silence all devices. Click on the globe at the bottom of your screen to select either English or Spanish. Public comment will be taken after each item. If you are in the auditorium and wish to comment, please use the iPads located in the lobby. For meetings in other locations, please complete a blue speaker card and provide it to a South Coast AQMD employee. Speakers may be limited to a total of 3 minutes or less for all agenda items, and times may be shortened to ensure all speakers can be heard. A countdown timer will be displayed on the screen for each public comment. Word time will be allotted for Spanish translation that is not simultaneous. For questions or issues on public comment, please call the public advisor at 909-396-3247. That's 909-396-3247. Please adhere to the speaker time limit and treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you being removed from the meeting. Be aware that this meeting is being recorded. By participating, you are authorizing recording of audio and visual content presented during the live event and consent to subsequent use of the recording in the public domain by South Coast AQMD.
I'd call to order the Station Resource Committee for the month of August and ask for roll call.
Good morning. Councilmember Caccioti? Absent. Senator Delgado? Absent. Supervisor Mitchell?
Present.
Board Member Padilla-Campos?
Present.
Mayor Salache? Absent. And Chair McCowan?
Here, and Vice Chair.
Councilmember Caccioti, you're right. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. On to our informational items. We have update on our proposed Rule 1165 presented by Michael Morris. Mike?
Good morning, Chair McCowan and board members. Proposal Rule 1165 for control of emissions from municipal waste incinerators. Next slide, please. Is designed to regulate the one municipal solid waste incinerator that we have in the Southern California area. That's the Southeast Resource Recovery Facility, otherwise known as SURF. We have identified it in 2 of our plans as control measures regulating NOx and PM from this one facility. Next slide, please. Additionally, in 2023, the US EPA put out the Good Neighbor Plan, which identifies types of industries that have the potential to have such high NOx emissions that they could interfere with other states' attainment. And they identified this facility as needing to have a lower emission rate than they currently had. This will take place in 2026, and the EPA will move forward with this regardless of what we do here. Next slide, please. The SURF facility was first established in 1988. It was designed to operate for 30 years. We just passed the 36th year of its operation. It burns approximately 1,300 tons of trash per day, and emits at this time more than 3/4 of a ton of NOx all by itself, and about 1/10 of a ton of PM, again, all by itself. The facility earlier this year did declare that they were going to be decommissioning their facility with operations ending probably early next year. However, this isn't the first time that we've heard that this facility is going to decommission. It has happened several times in the past. And additionally, at this point, they haven't surrendered their permits. So if they did decide to continue operating, they could do so at this time. Next slide, please. So we're proposing NOx emission limits in line with the Good Neighbor Plan, effective the same compliance date as the Good Neighbor Plan, which is 2026. We also did a best available retrofit control technology assessment, or BART assessment, associated with this rule and found that they could reduce their emissions even further through the installation of selective catalytic control or selective catalytic reactive or SCR, and reducing their emissions further. And we're projecting a compliance date of 2029, assuming that they continue operations. This type of technology would also have a co-benefit of reducing PM emissions with no further costs. And this again would also be the lower PM emissions would be in 2029. Next slide, please. In addition to NOx and PM limits, the proposed rule would include housekeeping requirements to address fugitive dust that might be coming from the facility, odor capture and control for the trash where it's stored or held, and then continuous monitoring of the exhaust stack for the facility. Next slide, please. We're expecting through this rule, if the facility were to continue to operate, just over 0.2 of a ton of NOx emission, again, just from this one facility, with a cost effectiveness of approximately $27,500 per ton of NOx reduced. There would be that co-benefit of PM emission reductions, again, at no cost because of the type of control equipment to handle the NOx. Next slide, please. So the socioeconomic assessment for this rule is already available. It is projecting an annual cost of about $3.4 million annually, and there is a projection of 9 jobs foregone because of this rule. As this is only one facility that would be requiring addition of control technology, there aren't any significant impacts as far as our California Environmental Quality Act, and so we're preparing a notice of exemption for that rule. Next slide, please. At this time, we're not aware of any key issues, and as I mentioned, this will be brought to our board in September for your consideration. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from committee members? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this item?
There are no requests to speak in the auditorium.
Very good. I don't see any online. So we need a motion from the committee? Or is this just an update?
This
No
is
motion required. Okay, very good. Then we'll move on. Thank you very much, Michael. We'll move on to item 2, an update on the proposed amended rule 1135. And the other Michael Krause.
Trying to make it easier for everyone. Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present to you our proposed amendments to our Rule 1135. This is addressing nitrogen oxide emissions at electric generating facilities. Next slide, please. Okay, by way of background, this rule was originally established back in 1989 to, again, address the NOx emissions from these facilities. Our latest amendment back in 2022 focused on requirements that we have specifically at the site on Santa Catalina Island. As you can see here on the box, we've set sort of caps over time. This allows the facility some flexibility and be able to generate the power they see best fit, but also try to maintain a limitation on the amount of emissions that are occurring at that facility. We were directed to take a look at how much we could go further than the last cap that we have at 13 tons per year. Next slide, please. However, as we kind of look at this as kind of obvious to most folks, there are some challenges. You know, it is an island. Therefore, things like the fuel that is being utilized there on the island needs to be barged. We're aware of basically only one barge company at this point that does this service. This is a small facility footprint, as you can see from the picture. There are limited land use abilities there because most of the island is owned by the Conservancy there with a lot of strict limitations. And then also you have to consider the fact that even if something is completely ideal and working in the best conditions it can, there could be some challenges or barriers that come across. So we want to make sure that there's enough fuel supply. They have a standard out there about 30 days of that fuel supply, just to ensure that everything is up and running. Next slide, please. So in addressing those challenges, the staff looked at in doing our BART analysis, we started looking at all the factors involved as far as like fuel usage, barge trip, space, et cetera. We did have an initial BART determination. This is a proposed new cap going forward. We did base this on a sort of really stringent scenario that we came up with. 30%, as you can see, 30% zero emissions. We were looking at solar. Again, there's a lot involved in that to make that successful. A big chunk on the near zero, we're looking at the propane fuel. They already do get propane fuel going to the island. And then the remaining amount utilizing the diesel engines, but the most upgraded diesel engines. And I'll touch on that in a moment. Of course, when you look at all these technologies and you think of solar and you think of things like operating propane, whether that's a fuel cell or linear generator or what have you, these are all technologically feasible, right? But again, there's challenges of being on the island. So one of the things that Edison requested was like, can we do a study? Can we do a grid stability study? Because it's one thing, again, to say you're operating something, particularly when you're talking about we're just one station on that island and you're having to transmit that power across the island and dealing with all these like factors that are involved. They wanted to have that study done. So that was done. And we did take a look at that study and we looked at where the challenges were. And again, one thing to be technically feasible, another to be like realistically feasible in making this all kind of happen. And so in doing so, we've revised our proposed NOx limit to go further beyond 13 down to 6 tons per year. Next slide, please. So this is kind of just giving you an overview. Again, this affects only one facility on the Santa Catalina Island. We all recognize that these engines are quite old. They date back to over 60 years for one of the engines, and the newest one is still close to 30 years old. So we do all recognize that there needs to be some change, and so we're working on this proposal that I'm about to present to you today. Next slide, please. So what we're looking at is different scenarios by which we can relook at the caps. So we do have the caps there. You can see the 45, you can see the 13, you recognize those already existing in the rule. Realistically, in order to meet those caps, certain things need to happen. So certain pieces of equipment need to be installed, and recognizing that none of this happens overnight, that you need to get approvals and things like that. So it does take some time. So we wanted to map out that realistic time frame. But we also felt there was a need by extending some of these, which is necessary, that we wanted to keep checks to make sure that the progress is being made, right? We do this a lot, like increments of progress, right? So instead of just having the 45 and the 13 cap that we currently have in the rule, we added a 30 cap to ensure that we're getting a glide path, that we're sure that action's being taken out there to continue to move closer to those target goals. And in addition, because of our latest assessment, we felt we could also push that further out there on the island down to a 6 tons per year cap limit. So, fulfilling what the board directive is to take a look at what's feasible, or how we can go beyond that 13. And so that's what we did just there. One of the things that came up during the discussions with the stakeholders in the working groups was the what ifs, right? So like, what if in putting all this together, something's needed, right? So let's just say that there's a limitation for us we've got the construct, but there's a limitation. Something happens where something is just not feasible. Can we get an extension on that? If we have a definitive effective date, we want to make sure that it's being met, right? And so we wanted to make sure that if there was a reasoning for a need for that extension, we provide that. And there's also certain things too, by the way, that are out of their control, right? So let's just say the approval from EPA is being dragged out, or there's a local city approval or something like that. Let's say there was a supply chain issue. All of these factors, we wanted to make sure that we recognized and we responded to. Next slide, please. So this kind of gives you an idea of the glide path. I know, a lot of words, sorry about that. But basically what we're doing here is we're showing, again, those proposed limitations we have, the 14, 30, these are all caps going over time. And I wanted to kind of just highlight some of those, some of those elements. So to meet that 45, they would have to, upgrade those the current diesel engines. Again, these are older engines. And when you put in things like tier 4, you're going to get a lot of emission reductions. As a matter of fact, when you get to the second tier with all 3 of those tier 4 engines, replacing 3 of those diesels in there, we will achieve 60% reduction in NOx emissions than their current operations. So we think this is a really good story and a good glide path. Again, we're not there yet, but we're getting there. So we continue moving along until achieving that 13. Now we need to introduce some near zeros. Again, propane is coming over. They would have to increase that. There's deliveries and storage, all these, challenges, but we think it's doable. It's technologically reasonable and feasible. And so, but moving in and migrating. So the more you're using these near zeros, the less you're using the diesel. This is all good. And to get down to that 13. And then again, pushing further now, we're introducing zero emission technology. And I know there's been a lot of talk, people saying, oh, you need to push for zero. We are 30%. We're targeting 30% zero out there on the island at that, to meet that 6-ton per year cap. So we think that's a good story. Getting down another little statistic I'll put out there, going from the current operational emissions down to the 6 generates 90% emission reductions in NOx. In addition, because we're utilizing less and less of the diesel, whether it's cleaner or whether we're not going to be operating it, and that final stage is over 99% reduction in per PM. So again, we think we've got a good scenario set up here that we're proposing, a good glide path. We think that's something that's reasonable, that can be achieved, and we get good results. Okay, next slide, please. So this is another way of kind of looking at it, whether you're looking at the diesel engines. Again, this is at the final point. Wanted to highlight the fact that we've added some provisions in there that at some point, once those newer diesel engines in there, no more diesel gets in there. And also we're addressing the other 3, what we're calling legacy diesels. And at some point, those will then be removed also from the island. So there's a story there. But this near zero, like I said, we're looking on this analysis at propane, but that doesn't limit them. They could be utilizing something else if that works, but definitely getting down those emissions. And then finally, zero emissions, looking at either solar, or you can even use hydrogen fuel cells. So there's options to be done and can be achieved. Next slide, please. So I think I kind of touched on some of these things, removal of the old legacies. We added a provision in there, again, to kind of, because again, stakeholders were concerned, like, how do we know? Like how do we know it's just going to be the 3 tier 4, not 4 tier 4, things like that. So we added a provision there to kind of shore that up. And then, finally, again, addressing a zero. The final goal and the final target can't be met without some level of zero emission technology. Next slide, please. This is now looking at some of the cost effectiveness. Again, I highlighted some of these reductions here. You'll see these in actual numbers. When it comes to the AQMP, I want to point out 2 things. First off, to give you a sense, under the last AQMP, for the 2022, for the control measure dealing with all EGFs, so now we're just talking about one location here, mind you, we're talking about all EGFs. This particular one location, looking at that at the endpoint at 65 tons per year is a pretty big chunk. To give a sense of it, our first goal in the AQMP is at 33 tons per year reductions. So, this is really contributing a lot, and we'll be easily making up that goal in 2032 in the AQMP. That's at 33. And then overall, we're looking at when you reach the final endpoint of that NOx limit, we're talking about a cost effectiveness of $32,000 a ton. So it's well under our recommended threshold or recommended guidance number in the plan. Next slide, please. When it comes to socioeconomic impact, it's a really interesting story here, because when you look at that 30% solar, you're now not utilizing fuel that costs a lot of money. And when you're looking at things like propane versus diesel and those kind of costs involved there, when you're looking at the full life of this project, we're actually seeing a savings under our socioeconomic analysis. And we're also looking at a little bit of a job gain as well with all the work that needs to be done. The actual details of all of this will be coming out, of course, in our socioeconomic analysis. But I do want to touch on giving you those values there, because I know that you're interested. Okay, and then on the CEQA side, we're doing a subsequent environmental assessment on that. So that's already out into the public currently. Next slide, please. So right now we're scheduled to set the hearing in September for a public hearing in October. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Michael. Question, are we requiring the diesel Tier 4 engines to use renewable diesel fuel?
We are not requiring it. However, in conversations with Edison, there is an interest and they are looking in that.
And how much further reduction would that be in the emissions?
We haven't cracked I don't think there's going to be too much on the NOx side of things, but a good deal on the GHG side. But I don't have those numbers.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Other questions from committee members, comments? Yes, go ahead, Supervisor Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just had a question, would like to hear the response to the letter written by the California Safe Schools Coalition, who reflected the fact that the staff's BARC analysis wasn't reflected in the content of the rule, and they suggested that that was a rather unusual practice. So staff could respond to that for me.
Sure, no problem. So yes, as I mentioned earlier, we did have an initial, what I want to emphasize here, an initial BART determination, utilizing the factors that we had at that time. Again, we did have a grid stability study. We did listen to the response as far as like some of the challenges out there. Again, to remind everyone, we're talking about an island that will have limited issues with things like delivery or storage, and this is a unique facility because they don't have anywhere to turn to if those needs are not met. So this facility powers everything on the island, right? So it doesn't just power the electricity, it's also power the movement of the water, sewage, et cetera. So it's a really critical facility. So it really does need to have a reliance, needs to know that it can actually fulfill all that. Now, our original analysis, if we're the near zero, we went all the way, right? As we always like to do. Maximum emission reductions we can get, right, out of that. But there comes a trade-off on that. To get that maximum emission reductions, to maximize those near zero technologies means we have to be sure that the large amount of propane that needs to get to the island will get to the island on time, will be there to power up those. And if they can't get it there, to make sure there's enough of the supplies out there on the island so the island can continue to function. So that was the concern, and that's why we did another look at that and have our proposal at 6.
And one more question, if I may, Mr. Chair. I understand that Edison will be doing their own feasibility analysis. Do we think that's prudent as opposed to third party, just somebody else?
So, okay, so the feasibility analysis, I think, is going to be more in coordination with all parties, right? So we need to hear from them what the challenges are, and then staff will be vetting what that is.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Just a question, do they also cook through, is there any natural gas that comes to the island, or is it just this facility that does it all?
So, so to power the homes there, they're actually powered 2 different ways, right? So one of them, they actually do have propane that's actually being currently delivered to the island, and some folks do use propane for their, I think you were about to say cooking, right?
Yeah.
And things like that. The other elements, the facilities or the electricity is powered by the station.
Thank you.
You bet.
I'll now call for public comment. Do we have any in the house here?
Yes, Chair. We have 2 requests to speak in the room. First one is Jesse Marquez.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Jesse Marquez. I'm the founder of the Coalition for a Safe Environment. We're a 23-year-old environmental justice organization. And it's sad that every time we come to these types of meetings, we have a conflict in the research. Number one, we already accepted 1135. What is the real problem? SCE already knew the requirements, the deadlines, the milestones, what had to be done to comply with the existing Rule 1135. So they had no intentions to want to do anything. Problem number 2, AQMD failed to enforce those timelines and those requirements. AQMD did that. We suspect it was upper management, negotiating, talking with SCE because of their political structures and lobbyists. But that's the reality of what happened. So why are we here today with an amendment? They're getting a free get out of jail ticket. There's no penalties, no sanctions for their failure. In our comments, we listed 9 things that we thought needed to be done. Looking at the photo, you can see the project site. Buildings are there, solar could be put on top of those buildings and could have been done already. Other areas, the solar panels could have just been put higher over the tanks or over any other entity. So that's where solar could have kicked in already. You also have tidal wave energy. There's a dozen companies all over the world installing tidal wave energy, types of things that can generate electricity. Hydrogen fuel cells. There are more than a dozen companies that already have package, and there are companies that integrate things together where they can deliver an electrolyzer to process the water to make it into hydrogen gas. And then there's another container that has the hydrogen fuel cells. That has been available over 10 years now. So all these alternative technologies have been available for 10 years or more. Solar, we're talking about 25, 30 years. So there was no excuse. And on top of that, there have been state and federal grants all these last 10 years. That could be, applications could have been put in for them to get the funding to either pay 100% for the trial and the building of this, in some cases.
Thank you, Jesse, for your comments. Next.
Next commenter is Beth Quimbo.
Thank you, Chair and staff. Good morning. My name is Beth Marie Kimball from Southern California Edison. First, I want to thank staff for providing an update to the Stationary Source Committee members. SCE appreciates staff's efforts to establish fair and feasible regulations. We support the emission limit targets and will apply our best efforts to meet the emission limits and the deadlines in the proposed amended rule. And we appreciate the feasibility studies. In addition to the clean air goals, we must balance priorities to deliver safe, reliable power and all of the life-critical utilities on the island to the residents and its 1 million visitors each year. You heard about the glide path. However, there are a multitude of challenges to overcome, and we seek your continuous support to make sure this project is successful. We still have a high level of uncertainty as to whether we can meet the future targets due to regulatory approvals, safety concerns raised by the delivery of fuel, supply chain, land availability for solar, and other extenuating circumstances that could occur, as well as what the NZE and ZE technology landscape will look like in the future, and what the best options will be to provide a stable grid and to meet emission limits targets. For these reasons, it's critical for the rule to provide that flexibility and safeguards to provide relief if meeting the limits and requirements in the rule are deemed infeasible by the respective deadlines. We have submitted a comment letter on August 14th that highlights these concerns for staff's consideration, and we appreciate the follow-up on that. We hear stakeholder input while understand the importance of aligning strategies with what is feasible and achievable. We are committed to implementing practical solutions for Pebbly Beach Generating Station that will have a tangible impact on our underserved communities. We want to underscore the success of the repower calls for continuous support and partnership with AQMD, its board members, the City of Avalon, its fire chief, the island stakeholders, as well as other agencies that we must work with, such as the California Public Utilities Commission, the California Coastal Commission, LA County, to name a few. We appreciate the opportunity to provide comments, and we look forward to the considerable work ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any others in-house?
No more commenters in-house. We do have commenters on Zoom.
Okay, first one is, I can't read it.
Is it?
Rabina Sewell.
Good morning, Chair and honorable committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to comment today. My name is Rabina Sewell. I'm the Executive Director of California Safe Schools, an environmental health and environmental justice coalition celebrating our 26th year. Almost 3 years ago, we appeared before this committee and were encouraged by the direction that staff would prepare a new technology assessment and evaluate those zero emission technologies that we knew were now commercially available. We knew that fuel cells were feasible, and over the course of the last few years, other options have been created, like distributed generation using rooftop solar. We were initially very optimistic by the enthusiastic progress by staff, but today we're discouraged by the delays to get here and delays in emission reduction timeframes, and by the very weak limits added to this rule. We're distressed that engineering and science seem to be going by the wayside, and it does appear like special consideration is being given to big utility. If this is how AQMP will be implemented on a source that produces over 10% of the emissions from power generation in the basin, yet only provides less than 0.06% of the power, our clean air will remain only a dream. So please send this rule back, as California Safe Schools and other concerned groups have respectfully recommended in our comment letter. And we thank you again very much for the opportunity to comment today. And we fully support comments just made by Jesse Marquez for Coalition for a Safe Environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabina. Next, we have Mark Abramowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Mark Abramowitz with Community Environmental Services. Thank you for the opportunity to address you regarding the proposed amendments. Unfortunately, I have to join with the others who are opposing these amendments. You have our written comments. In a bit of deja vu, the proposed changes fail to meet state requirements that the district adopt rules reflecting best available retrofit control technology. Mike didn't say they changed the BART. He just explained what they did. And that's the reason this was sent back in the first place. This time, the staff acknowledges that the proposed rule fails to meet BART, and yet proposes a rule that takes us backwards and extends deadlines in part, and in part fails to eliminate emissions that staff says are feasible to eliminate. The proposed rule also gives special treatment not given to other sources. 3 years ago, board member Padilla Campos asked a simple question. Why don't we just go back and look at it again? Staff did that and found we were correct. Zero emission technology on Catalina Island is feasible. And at the time, the AQMP didn't even rely on a zero emission strategy. Now it does, and yet a source representing a huge amount of power production emissions relative to the amount of power it produced, and is also under an order for abatement for violating district toxics rules. The foundation of the AQMP is being violated, with even more of the currently prohibited diesel engines being proposed. You will hear that the site for power production is space constrained. That's very true. And the BART analysis takes that into account. In fact, based upon the data, it overstates space needs and underestimates the ability to address those needs. But be clear, the proposed rule is being opposed so vehemently because it doesn't even match that BART analysis. It unnecessarily extends deadlines while allowing more than triple the emissions. The comment letter from several of us asks you to send the rule back with specific direction to bring a rule before the board that reflects BART as required by state law, address public concerns regarding the 95% zero emission BART analysis, maintain the current prohibition of new diesel engines, include a proposed rule eliminating diesel engines by a date certain, include in a proposed rule a future date certain after which the NOx cap will be dropped to zero, and refrain from duplication of efforts and consideration of grid stability issues that are properly under the purview of the California Public Utilities Commission and not the SCAQMD. We urge you to give that direction.
Thank you, Mark, for your comments. Wayne, would you like to respond?
Barbara can speak to the issue that was raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The comment indicates the belief that the rule does not reflect best available retrofit control technology as required by statute. We strongly disagree. Health and Safety Code 40406 defines best available retrofit control technology as an emission limitation that is based on the maximum degree of reduction achievable, taking into account environmental, energy, and economic impacts. So what you heard from Mr. Kraus in describing the staff analysis supporting this rule, the staff did take into consideration the impacts on energy availability and reliability and other factors that are unique to this island in setting the schedule for reductions. And indeed, the staff did require reductions going beyond what the previous rule required, down to 6 tons. And so there were, in my opinion, the staff did perform an appropriate BART analysis to reach this rule.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Michael?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff, just, there was, I know, a comment about the constrained area for, it's limited, I seen the picture on one of those slides. Mike, is there any, have you done a really kind of thorough assessment of any possibility of any more rooftop solar in the area? I know there's, with the Conservancy, I sit on one, they don't like buildings on their land. But is there any possibility of any other location at the site? Or you can extend it, or are there rooftops here we can put it on?
Yeah, so we did, of course, we did look at solar, and there actually is a ranch in the middle of the island that they're in conversations with the Conservancy about doing some leasing of that land. It does give it, you need certain elements, right? So you need a sort of open space, you need to be able to, capture sun at a certain angle, those kinds of things. And so, but that's going to take a little time because there's a number of things like Coastal Commission and, folks like that you need to get those approvals. But yeah, that's what we're looking at. So it's a more bank of that, and also the transmission from that, since it's in the middle of the island, be able to get those out, to get the power out to other sources.
If we were able to secure something like that and like a lease, could we then in the future could amend the rule, right? If we determine that we can access that, it's helpful.
Well, I don't think there's a need to amend the rule. Again, when we look at that last target goal at 6, you're gonna need some zero emission technologies. This is one of those viable options that they could take. And again, they're in conversations on that, in that front.
So that looks like towards the end of the rule, right? Towards 2035 or so at the bottom?
Right, but again, we're trying to build in that necessary time that it takes to get those approvals and to be able to, get it all installed.
I still know those
and all that,
Conservancies, they meet every month. Should be able to get it, should get on our agenda pretty quick. That's all. I'm concerned that people are dragging their feet when this might be able to be accomplished sooner.
Yeah.
But there's more than just the Conservatives. There's the Coastal Commission, there's a CPCU, all of those. Your comment?
So sort of following with that comment, what's happening before January 1, 2027 to ensure that, there are steps being taken for that date to accomplish those reductions for that date?
Sure. So in order to meet that cap, they're going to need to replace at a minimum 2 of those old diesel engines with these tier 4s. So right now they've got permit applications in. They need permit applications. They need a CEQA document, as you can imagine, in order to issue those permits, and also EPA approval. So there are a number of steps that need to be taken. Plus, once you get the approvals, then you actually have to bring the equipment over and do the whole install and all those things to make sure that it's operating and you can meet that limit.
So you're saying some of that is already happening now?
Yeah,
because they've
we're in
submitted.
process, yeah.
Okay, because I understand, we asked for the BART, hope I said that right. And we're making more exceptions because it's an island and there's some natural restrictions that we need to consider. We want to make sure, the population is not left with no power. So I just want to make sure that right now steps are being taken to get to that goal, because I don't want us to continue to extend and extend. I understand Edison is doing their own analysis, but I hope that that analysis or that whatever study they're doing is not brought back and then we bend again. You said this is going to be used in cooperation. It's not going to be used to say, okay, you're correct, we're going to do it this way. We're using whatever they bring to us to continue the work that we're doing. We're not going to just take their word for it, right?
That's right.
I don't know.
That's right. Yeah, there's has to be proofing of that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I needed to hear that.
You bet.
Because like I said, I just don't want this to be used as an excuse to continue delaying. And I just want to see steps being taken today for those goals, which I agree with you are going to be quite significant once we meet each deadline here. Thank you.
I already stated.
Any other comments from committee members? Seeing none, this is an informational item. We'll move on to item 3, which is an update on the proposed amended rule 1173. Michael again, different Michael, but same Michael.
Me again. So next slide, please. 1173 regulates fugitive emissions from valves, flanges, and other connecting equipment at refineries, chemical plants, and oil and gas production sites. There are approximately 2.3 million of these types of components out there in these facilities. This rule is being amended as part of to address objectives in the Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach Community Emission Reduction Plan, as well as our AQMP from 2022. Next slide, please. So currently, most of the inspections are conducted using a toxic vapor analyzer, which basically is a handheld instrument that you walk up to the piece of equipment and you put the probe right on the equipment itself. You have to do this one by one. It's a rather cumbersome process. What we're hoping to do as part of this rule amendment is to update the technology used for these types of inspections by incorporating optical gas imaging into the rule. This optical gas imaging, as you can see by the picture here, you look through a camera, it gives you a field of view through that camera with the infrared. You can see visible emissions much easier. And so we feel through this methodology, we can find larger leaks very quickly and get them repaired right away. Through that process, we expect to reduce emissions from these types of components by 0.4 tons per day. Next slide, please. We're also looking at reducing the leak standards associated with this type of equipment. Right now, the leak standard is 500 parts per million. We did, through a BART assessment, lower those limits for valves and fittings, which compose about 90% of the components subject to this rule, down to 100 parts per million. And for pumps, that will be reduced from 500 down to 400. As you can see, most of the emission reductions, 1.39 tons, is through that lowering of the valves and fittings. Next slide, please. Other amendments that are associated with this rule include simplifying the repair schedule so that it's clear how soon equipment has to be repaired, allowing people to submit the information electronically through email instead of what they currently do now through CDs and flash drives, and then also make clear how to utilize the OGI camera and when using the OGI camera, when that would be a violation. Next slide, please. In this rule, we're also including contingency measures. There are 3 contingency measures that would be triggered if we fail to meet a reasonable further progress milestone or a NAAQS attainment standard. These would be applied sequentially, and they're related to either reducing the leak standard for certain pieces of equipment or having a more frequent OGI if one of these triggers were to occur. Next slide, please. So we have done the cost effectiveness for these proposals. For the overall cost effectiveness with this rule is just over $18,000, and we're expecting just under 1.9 tons per day of VOC emission reductions. Next slide, please. So there are two key issues. The first is related to delay of repair. So when we do find a leak, the facility is required to repair it within 1 day. And then if they need additional time, they can go up to 14 days, and there's a process for that. But with lowering the standards down this low, there is a concern that two things might happen that might require the shutdown of certain parts of the facility. The first is that they may end up trying to fix a leak in an area where it's unsafe for someone to go and repair that type of leak. And the second is that in repairing that type of leak, you might actually have to shut down that entire area or unit. And when you shut down the equipment, there is dramatic emissions associated with that. All the control devices have to go offline. And so in order to repair a small leak, you might generate orders of magnitude more emissions by shutting down that unit. And so we're looking to include a provision to address this delay of repair, because obviously we don't want to, in addressing these small leaks, create a bigger problem by shutting down. We've been asking for information from the facilities to help us have bumpers or guidelines associated with this provision. And recently we did get that information. We are working right now on trying to incorporate how we would include this type of provision. We're expecting to release rule language, updated preliminary rule language in about 2 weeks, and give our stakeholders another 2 weeks to review it. And so we're looking to move the public hearing from its scheduled in October into November to try and incorporate this provision. Next slide, please. So the other area that we'd like to address are fin-fan plugs. So heat exchangers are utilized at these facilities, and you could see a picture of a heat exchanger on the top right. In those heat exchangers, they have small plugs that are threaded, and they go into the heat exchanger, and they do occasionally leak. And there's been some discussion between the regulated facilities and our air district about how exactly that rule, the Rule 1173, applies to these fin-fan plugs. And so we want to make it clear that the rule does apply to these fin-fan plugs. But we will need to look at where a delay of repair might be acceptable for this. These heat exchangers are high pressure and high temperature areas. And this is exactly the kind of thing that might be unsafe for someone to go and try to repair. So we are looking at including language for fin-fan plugs. We'll also be doing an assessment of the costs and emission reductions associated with that, going from our current leak standard of 500 parts per million down to a lower level. But that is also something that is a work in progress at this time. Next slide, please. So the preliminary socioeconomic assessment, impact assessment, excuse me, shows that there's going to be an additional cost of approximately $13 million per year for this regulation. And I get to say something I hardly ever get to say when I'm up here. There's actually jobs gained as part of this rule. We are planning on having the final socioeconomic impact assessment 30 days prior to the public hearing. On here it says October, but it'll probably that's probably when it'll be released in October for a November hearing. Next slide, please. The rule, as you heard, is mostly about monitoring and repairing, so that we don't expect much in terms of physical modifications to the rule. And so therefore, the CEQA will be a notice of exemption for this proposal. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, up here we have a public hearing of October, but we're planning to move that to November to address those two key issues. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Comments or questions from committee members? Seeing none, is there any public comment?
Chair, we have 3 requests to speak in the room. First commenter is John Heinz.
Good morning, honorable board members. My name is John Heinz, and I'm an attorney with Latham and Watkins. I'm here today on behalf of the Regulatory Flexibility Group, which is a coalition of California entities that are subject to various district rules, including 1173. I'd like to start by thanking staff for its continued robust engagement during the development of this rule. We've appreciated the working groups and the individual meetings, and just making the time to discuss the proposed amendments and the potential challenges. So we are in support of staff's proposal to allow additional time to work through the key issues identified today. And we look forward to advancing the dialogue over the next several weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Next.
Next commenter is Ramin Ross.
Good morning, Stationary Source Committee. My name is Ramin Ross, and I represent the Western States Petroleum Association. First, would also like to start by thanking staff for their effort on this rule. WISPA and its members have appreciated the time staff has taken to discuss our concerns. We believe the conversations have been both helpful and productive. There are still a few challenges that remain, and we are supportive of the additional time to allow us to continue to workshop solutions to our concerns. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Our last comment, in-person commenter is Jesse Marquez.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. When I filled out the card, I had put in support of, well, I'm changing it to oppose it. What they are proposing, yes, is great. Yes, it's an improvement, has a lot of benefits. But here's what I've also learned too. They are not addressing the root cause of problem of these leaks from all these various components. What is the root cause? Well, I've read numerous reports of these failures, and I have brought this up many times in the past. AQMD fails to study, research, assess manufacturer warranties. I spoke with a dozen different part manufacturers. Everyone told me that none of their parts for the petroleum industry have more than a 10-year warranty. None. What industry does is allow it to fail because they do have an expiration date. And it's never past 10 years. After that, yes, it's going to crack. Yes, it's going to corrode. Yes, for many different things, because AQMD has not required these petroleum industry users to provide you the manufacturer's warranty for every system component used. Is those documents will show you it's not expected to go past that time frame. So if you know there is a time frame where it expires, then they must replace it. They must replace it. When ExxonMobil exploded on the ESP over there, yes, when the plant manager testified, I don't understand what happened and why it exploded. There's nothing in the ESP that can explode, which is true. There is no gas, petroleum, anything. However, there was a gas leak outside the building that then entered into the ESP, and that's how it got ignited. So if we're talking about leak detection, there was no gas VOC detector around the ESP and around, the hydrogen, hydrogen fluoride tanks there. Even employees reported and told us they smelled gas in the air. VOCs cost less than $2,000 and can be networked to alert immediately. That needs to be added to this regulation now, in addition to the.
Thank you for your comments. Any further comments from committee members? Seeing none, this is another information item. So we'll move on to status report on Regulation 13, New Source Review. And this is by Dr. Wong. Dr. Wong.
Good morning. Not a mic,
Not a mic, right?
unfortunately.
A Jillian.
Thank you, Chair McCallan and members of the committee. So this is an annual item that we bring to the board. In January, we brought the preliminary determination of equivalency, and today I'm here to bring you the final determination. So since this is something that you have seen before, I will move very quickly through the background slides and get to the meat of what I'm here to present. Next slide. Thanks. So if you look at New Source Review on the status report, since 1990, we have been preparing these reports. And at EPA's request, we did adopt Rule 1315 that was adopted into the SIP or approved into the SIP. Next slide, please. What New Source Review does is it regulates, and we do an accounting to make sure that all emission changes are accounted for and any emissions increases do not affect our ability to attain air quality standards. Next slide, please. So 1315 sets up our tracking system. If you, within Regulation 13, we do provide offset exemptions for emergency equipment and very small sources. However, those are not exempt from federal offset requirements. Therefore, we are required to account for those offsets that are provided by our rules, and it is provided by us from our internal offset accounts. So this is to ensure that we do stay in compliance with federal offset requirements and that we can continue to issue permits. Next slide, please. So 1315 has requirements of what we are to track, how we are to track it, and what we are to report to the board every year. Next slide, please. And this gets to the meat of what I'm here to present today. So if you look for calendar year 2022, all the ending balances are positive, which means that we have demonstrated equivalency with the federal offset requirements. Next slide, please. And in addition to looking at what we did for 22, we also look forward and project for the next 2 years. And based on our projections, we are once again, as you see, positive. So therefore, we are projecting that we will continue to be equivalent. Next slide, please. And for 2024, those are our projections. Once again, positive, we will be equivalent. Next slide, please. Another aspect of 1315 is a CEQA backstop provision, and that requires us to look at all cumulative net increases since 2011. And if you look at it, our cumulative net emission increases are less than the thresholds within the rule, and therefore we too have demonstrated that we meet that requirement. Next slide, please. So this is just a historical look at where the balances have been over the years. And as you see, they all are positive, and so therefore, once again, maintaining that we have demonstrated equivalency. Next slide, please. We also look at how we compare to the state NSR program, and ending balances continue to be positive. Therefore, we do comply, or we do show equivalency there. Next slide, please. And the final slide, in conclusion, as you have seen from the tables, our balances are healthy, continue to be positive. Therefore, we have demonstrated equivalency with federal NSR offset requirements. Our projections show that for the next 2 years, we anticipate that we will continue to be equivalent, and cumulative net emissions increases are less than the rule threshold. And for 2023, we will be preparing the preliminary determination that will come to this committee in January and to the board in February. This final determination will go to the board in September. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Michael. Any comments from committee members? Questions? Seeing none, any public comment on this item?
No request to speak in the room, Chair.
And there's none online, so we'll move on then to our written reports. We have 5, 6, and 7, which are written reports. Is there any need to discuss any of those items or committee members? Seeing none, we'll go on to any other business that we need to talk about. Seeing none, I'll go on to general public comment. Is there anybody in the public who wishes to speak on an item not on the agenda, which is under the purview of this committee? Seeing none, I'd like to adjourn this meeting in memory of Richard Alatorre, a pioneering LA political figure. He was a young man of 81 and happens to be the father of our very own Derek Alatorre. So without objection, we'll close this meeting in memory of Richard, his father.
Thank you for doing so, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. So our next meeting is on Friday, September 20th, 10:30 a.m. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you all for participating.